Hello and welcome to our live series, Ask the Experts. I'm Grace Farrell and we're having a slightly different episode this week because it's Carers Week. So we have Emily Holzhausen, who's Director of Policy at Carers UK, joining us to talk about being a carer and to give advice about the support that's available to carers and also tips on how to stay healthy, both physically and mentally. So if you'd like to get involved and get your questions in, simply comment with your questions and I'll put them to Emily and we'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. So let's kick things off with a few issues that we've been covering at Which as part of Carers Week. First of all, health and care. So we've had really worrying stats that have been released that the vast majority, in fact 72% of carers has suffered mental health issues as a result of being a carer, with 61% reporting that their physical health has also deteriorated. I mean, this is staggering. And why do you think we're seeing such high numbers in carers?
It is staggering, and I think one of the things is that people don't realise the impact it can have on them in terms of the emotional stress and the physical stress of managing everything. We asked people, what are your top stressors? And they're quite worrying results, really. They're a lack of sleep, they're just the sheer volume of care that people are providing, and worry about finances as well. And these things aren't necessarily things that people think they have to plan for or will happen to them in their life when they become a carer. It's something that just people do as part of family life or being a close friend. So we were really worried by the results. And I think the other thing too is that not enough funding is going into the care that is needed for families. So they're kind of picking up the shortfall as well. So there's two things going on really. One is that people aren't necessarily identifying themselves and getting the right support early on. And the other thing is that there's not always enough support to go round.
I see. And what can carers do to stay healthy physically and mentally? Sure.
I think one thing is to get a really good information and advice, and that is, which is a great place to start. Carers UK provides some advice as well, so does Age UK. I mean, there are lots of organisations locally as well that can provide advice on the kinds of support. This week there are thousands of events going on up and down the country, helping to identify carers and connect them with support. You could tell your GP you're a carer. That could help. They could link you into support. So it's important to identify yourself and not feel guilty about asking for support. Now, we know some of the benefits aren't very high at all, and carers would describe them as inadequate. But if you don't claim them, then that can have an impact on your pension potentially later in life. So I'd really urge people to get in touch with for information and advice.
And we're going to be talking about the benefits that are available to carers in just a little bit. But what do you think, Emily, if you do feel that you're at risk of burning out or becoming incapable as a result of caring and your health, what do you think you should do?
Really important thing is to go to your local council and ask for a carers assessment very quickly, and to really emphasise that you're reaching that point and you're very worried, or go and tell your GP. If you are assessed, it's possible that you may get support, and that support, it's a carer's break provided, which is help in the home. Equally, share the problem with your family. Perhaps they don't realise exactly where you are or how much you're doing. It's quite common that people keep these things quite privately. So it's very important that you look after your health. If your health breaks down, what happens to you and the person you care for? So it's important. We find that so often carers put themselves at the back of the queue. We want people to put them a little bit further up the queue.
Yeah, quite right. And we've had a question from Fran on Facebook about health and care. She's asked, do carers get free prescriptions?
Not if you're a carer per se. So you might get free prescriptions if you have certain conditions or you're on certain benefits, but carers themselves don't get free prescriptions. So it's something that they care quite a lot about, and certainly the people that don't get those benefits and don't get free prescriptions, the costs can mount up. So we're very well aware of some of the costs that carers have to bear as part of caring.
So moving on, well, we've had a question from Mike also on Facebook, who cares for his 48-year-old wife He wants to check whether the payments they receive for her care and his carer's respite can be used to pay for things that enhance well-being, such as hobbies, as well as pay for the replacement care. He's also read that the payments his wife receives can be used for their well-being, for example, upkeep of car, days out, decorating bedrooms, etc., etc. Do you know if this is correct?
One really important thing, if those are direct payments that come from a local authority, what you normally do with an assessment is look at the outcomes that you want to achieve. So some local authorities are quite tight on that and they monitor things quite tightly. So you have to make sure that whatever you're spending those direct payments on from the local council meet those outcomes. So if you're not sure, then try and jot them down about what did you agree with them, does that fit, does that work, and make sure that you look at that and perhaps ask the question of a local specialist organisation, advocacy organisation, just to check. The worst thing in the world is if the local authority doesn't agree with you. Mm-hmm. So I really would advise getting a little bit more advice locally and just seeing what how your council normally makes decisions.
And where can you find that local advice?
There are Welfare Rights will help you, your local carers organisation. Quite often there's some very good disability organisations. Local Age UKs are very good. Mm-hmm. They can all provide advice. And because each council is slightly different and has the processes slightly differently, that's why you need to ask. The framework is set out in the legislation, the Care Act, mm-hmm. about needing to achieve the right outcomes and services being put in place to achieve the right outcomes, but it's then what you agree with the local authority.
Right. So another thing we're focusing on this week at Which is carers in the workplace. 3 million people in Britain juggle caring responsibilities with either a full or part-time job. Is there any support in place for carers in the workplace?
I mean, it really depends on where you work as to what your workplace policies are. It's staggering, really, isn't it? There's about 1 in 8, 1 in 9 people is juggling work and care. You might be sitting next to somebody every day, working alongside somebody, you never know. It's quite often a private matter that people don't share in the workplace. The first thing I would say is look at your employment policies. What have you got there written down? Do you have a leave policy that looks about different compassionate leave in the workplace? You also have different rights. So you have a right to request flexible working. So you can ask your employer that. You have to sometimes come up with the framework where you think that will work.
Right.
They can say no if they think there's a good business reason. Why not? That's
right.
A good business reason. And you're entitled to request this after you've been working somewhere for 6 months or longer. So it's quite an open right. We'd like to see a little bit more flexibility around it, you know, for the right to request flexible working from day one.
Yeah.
But as it is, you know, there's some really good advice on the website, on Which website, on ACAS, on Carers UK around that. So have a look. They give good examples and have a think about how that might work for you.
Are you automatically entitled to compassionate leave if a loved one dies, or if you need to suddenly take time off to provide end-of-life care?
No, it's a bit more of a complicated one. So another right that we have if we're juggling work and care in the workplace is time off for dependents. And again, that's quite narrowly defined. It might be somebody that you care for, and it's time off in an emergency. Mm-hmm. So you have to inform your employer quite quickly. Case law shows that you can use that for arranging a funeral or attending a funeral, but it tends to be a small or reasonable amount of time. So it tends to be anything from a few hours to a few days under sort of force majeure. It's not a huge amount of time.
Right.
So it's not necessarily, if you need compassionate leave to really deal with the death of a loved one, there's no right to that.
Right.
There is, however, a bill going through Parliament at the moment and through the House of Lords, which would give parents who have lost a child under the age of 18 the right to take 2 weeks bereavement leave. So it's just going through the House of Lords. So some of those conditions might change. If they do, they're more likely to go up, I think, rather than down.
Yeah.
But it's been given support by the government, which is quite unusual, and it's something we really warmly welcome. So that will come in, you know, maybe in a year's time. We don't know yet. So we wish it well through the House of Lords.
Absolutely.
So it's important too to take a look at company policies to see what you've got, and if you're not sure, then to ask HR.
We've had a question from Caroline on Facebook. She says, I've been a carer for 12 years now for my elderly mother-in-law who lives with us. We have carers coming in 4 times a day as she's completely dependent. We struggle financially because I've not been able to go out to work and I'm unable to start up work from home as I can't commit to specific times. Are there any allowances or benefits I can collect as a carer apart from carer's allowance?
So there's a whole different range of benefits that might be possible to claim. So that's why, you know, the benefits, no one finds the benefit system easy.
No.
It's extremely complex and you really need to get good advice. So the first thing is your mother getting all the benefits that she's entitled to? Could she claim attendance allowance? It's not means tested, so if she has another income or she has a pension from different means, it doesn't matter. It depends on the level of need. So Age UK is brilliant at providing advice on that. They also help with form filling.
Really?
So, yes, locally, if you go and they will help you do that as well.
That's good.
It's a brilliant service, and it's quite a difficult, you know, applying for disability benefits is quite a difficult thing because you have to say what you can't do. So it's emotionally quite a difficult process, and the forms are quite long, lots of questions, and they are real experts at knowing how to fill forms in.
Fantastic.
So it's a really good service. So first is mum getting all the benefits that she's entitled to. Secondly, you know, you need a bit of an income check. Is there anything you might be entitled to? You might be entitled to something like council tax discount.
Okay.
Because you're living together. That is something where it can be backdated for several years. As long as you, yes. The longest one we had backdated in one query we had was sort of 10 years.
Really?
So it's a really good thing. So the rules are a little bit more complicated again. Your local organisations can help you with that. And Carers UK has also got some advice about council tax discount. But as the system's so complicated, you know, take each step as it comes. Make sure you find out. If you think you know, just keep asking the questions so you don't miss out on different things. It's very important.
Well, if you would like to get in touch with Ask the Experts this week, simply comment with your question and I will put it to Emily. Before we move on to a few more questions, I just want to talk quickly about carers allowance. We have touched on it. Jerry has asked on Facebook, are you eligible for carers allowance if you're married to the person that you care for?
Absolutely, as long as you fill all the conditions that are necessary for carers allowance. So the person you care for has to be getting the right level of disability benefit.
Right.
So they have to be getting attendance allowance or middle or higher rate disability living allowance or the care component of the daily living component for PIP.
Right.
So it's well worth finding out. You have to be providing at least 35 hours of care and have earnings of under £120 after deductions.
Right.
Your marital status doesn't make any difference whatsoever. We campaigned to have that changed.
Really?
And we did many years ago. So if you're married and you fulfil all the conditions, then you would be entitled, yes.
I'd like to ask, what actually defines a carer? Because it seems that a lot of people, without maybe knowing, are being carers.
Really, I mean, we've got the simplest definition of all, really. It's somebody who provides care unpaid for somebody who's older and needs support, disabled or has a long-term condition. So it might be as simple as making sure you're ringing up to somebody regularly to give them emotional support. And at the other end of the scale, you could be helping them with every single daily task, moving them, dressing them, feeding them, bathing them, helping them move around the house. Doing all of their paperwork, making sure all their finances are in order, taking them to appointments, administering medication. So it could be anything along that spectrum.
Right.
There's some hidden things. People quite often don't see that the care goes in if you're supporting somebody with a mental illness.
Right.
And that can be quite a lot of emotional support, but also some of the structural support that somebody might need.
Yeah.
So most people don't consider themselves to be carers. Their daughters, sons, partners.
Yeah.
First, or good friends, and quite a lot of neighbours do it as well.
Really?
Yes, more than people think.
Oh, well, that's lovely to hear. Right, so we're going to take questions from Facebook, also Twitter. One from Jane. She's made the point that carers save the government money, and there are still many children acting as carers. What's being done for them?
Well, one of the pledges that government has made more recently is to really look at upping the identification of children who have got caring responsibilities. Obviously, they're fairly hidden. They might be reluctant to come forward at school to identify themselves for fear of being bullied or being different. So there are quite a few schools that are doing some really good work. You know, I know in Lewisham, in Blackpool, there's some excellent work going on with young carers, different pockets around the country as well. So I hope that we'll see an improvement. I mean, we still do need to see better care for perhaps the parents that they're caring for, the grandparents, and maybe their brothers and sisters who have disabilities. We need to see better care for them so that children don't have to shoulder quite so much of the caring responsibility.
I mean, should children have to act as carers?
No.
So automatically they should be entitled to outside help if that is the situation in their family?
I mean, they have a right to be assessed, and the Children Act Section 17 also promotes their educational health and well-being and emotional development and social development, and they have a right to be supported in that. I would say that because we don't always have enough care going into families, children end up doing more than they should. But quite often children want to help to a certain degree, but the level of responsibility is not always appropriate for children.
No. Another Jane, she's asked, if you're in receipt of a government pension and therefore you don't get attendance allowance, is there any other support you can get if you're struggling financially?
So if you get a state pension, you can actually potentially get attendance allowance if you qualify for it. Yes, it's according to the need that you have. The two benefits that you can't get together are carers allowance and a state pension.
Right.
And that the reason for that is because they're classed as the same sort of benefit.
Right.
They're an income replacement benefit and you can't get two at the same time.
Right.
It's still worth applying for carers allowance even if you're older and you do get a state pension, just in case you've got a low income, because that actually might lead to a top up on your pension. So if you've got pension credit, for example, and you qualified for the conditions for carers allowance, you might not be paid it, but you might get an extra sort of extra payment, which might be up to £36 a week.
Really?
So it's well worth finding out about whether you would be entitled to apply for it and get it.
She's also asked on this same subject, if she said I had to give up work in order to be a carer, and as a result my pension is smaller. Is there any support or top up in place for that?
What we currently have is a system where if you claim the right benefits, so if you claim carers allowance, it gives you credit towards your pension.
Right.
So this is another really good reason why you need to find out about your entitlements to make sure you've got all your credited years for your pension. You don't automatically get a pension at the full rate. It doesn't work quite like that. So you have to have different contributions. And so if you don't get carers allowance, there is this thing called carers credit. So again, if you don't earn a lot of money, that carers credit is just a credit towards your pension if you're of working age.
Right.
So you need to just be providing over 20 hours care for somebody on the right level of benefits. So that's another route. If you're already getting a pension, as I say, there might be a whole range of different benefits that you might be entitled to. If you've got underlying entitlement to carers allowance, you might be able to get a top up. But I'm afraid if you do give up work to care, it does affect your pension in retirement because you can't make any private contributions. It's a bit of a campaign that we've got as sort of ongoing, really. We think the government should be crediting people in to private pensions as well. If that's the way that people are doing things in the future, then why aren't we doing that for carers as well? So it's something we want to see changed. We absolutely don't believe that if you've given up work to care, you shouldn't end up in poverty, and certainly not pay that penalty in retirement as well.
Thank you, Emily. So we've had a question come in from National Network, who's a parent carer forum on Twitter. They've asked what kind of support is available to parents of children with special educational needs and disabilities aged up to 25.
The National Parent Carer Network is a fantastic network of parents of children with disabilities. It's really, really active, and there's a whole range of different support. as a parent, you have a right to an assessment of your needs, and people don't always remember that within, you have that, we fought for that right. You have a right to be considered as an individual who is caring, as well as, you know, the needs of your child. So your child can be assessed for a whole range of different services. I would say one of the best organisations to go and look for that information is Contact. And they are a specialist organisation that support parents of disabled children. They've got fantastic information, so so I would check that out and see what support is available.
Thank you. Do keep your questions coming in. You can ask a question simply by commenting, and I'll put them to Emily. We're going to try and get through as many as we possibly can. This one's from Dorothy on Facebook. She thinks carers are long overdue for Parliament input. She says, I'm a carer for my son with severe learning disabilities, autism, epilepsy and challenging behaviour. He's 44 years old. What happened to the carer strategy that's usually presented for carers, and why a carer's action plan? Is this different? Is this something else?
Well, the carer strategy has been on a bit of a journey, I would say. It was announced about 3 years ago by the Secretary of State, and in between we've had several reshuffles and a general election. And then we had the announcement that the government would bring forward a consultation, a green paper, on the future funding of social care. And at that point, government wasn't sure what they would do with the carers strategy. They thought they might roll it into the green paper, and we said no. Carers need to have something separate. We've worked on this separately. And in looking at the carers strategy, nearly just below 6,000 carers responded with their thoughts and views about what it should be. So this carers action plan is something slightly different. It's shorter term. It's expected to be over the next 2 years. So what you won't see in it is any sort of bigger spending items. There's some important things that are in there that are a step forward. There's a discussion about the future employment rights of carers, looking at how would a proposal for care leave be brought forward. That's very important. Identifying young carers. What isn't in it is the sort of funding that carers want to see going into care. And particularly, when, you know, if you have a son who's very severely disabled in their 40s, you want to know what care is going to be provided for them for the future. So older carers have been talking about that. What's in it for us?
Yeah.
And it doesn't look at additional financial support for carers. So we've said that all of those things need to be tackled in this consultation on social care that's coming up, including carers. We have to make sure that that is not just about the hands-on care that's provided, that it also looks at carers' finances.
Well, what do you think of the carers action plan? I mean, how do you think it's going to help carers?
Well, I think it's important. There are some things in it that will help move things along, but it also tells us what's not in it, which is really important, that we make sure that government knows very clearly what we need to see in the green paper on social care. And because that is going to deal with sort of the medium to longer term funding, it makes it very clear what we need here and now, and we need that short term funding to go to local councils. That's desperately needed. We've lost over £5 billion, 6.3 actually, the Association of Directors of Social Services have said today. It's a lot of money to take out of a system over the years. And we need to fund care more sustainably. You know, families are picking up the shortfall, but the report which talks about their poor physical and mental health just shows you that has enormous consequences.
It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. And they've told us that as well, that they're really worried about the future and whether they think their health will get poorer. 6 out of 10 said that.
Really?
And just under half said that they thought it would affect their ability to care in the future. So it's a bit of a ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
And over a short period of time as well, that the government needs to look at and make sure that we have more breaks, more good quality care that is affordable for our families and friends.
Thank you. You are watching Ask the Experts. I'm Grace Farrar. I'm being joined by Emily Holzhausen, who's Director of Policy at Carers UK, because it is Carers Week. So if you have any questions about being a carer, do get involved simply by commenting. We've had a question from Umran. He asked, how can I get support from local government as my back and knees are making it hard for me to do ordinary housework?
Well, anybody who has their own care needs to go and talk to the local council about getting a care needs assessment. And equally, there might be local community organisations that might be able to provide lower level help. It's quite important that you look at asking for that help. So the eligibility criteria for help for local authorities are not always set very, very low, I'm afraid. They're getting increasingly high, but it's important to ask. So I would suggest they did that.
And what kind of care might he be entitled to?
It might be that the kind of care that they're entitled to would be help with housework is harder to come by.
Really?
It's harder to come by. There are usually 2 levels of eligibility you have to get through in order to qualify for council help, and it depends on your finances.
Right.
So it's a little bit more complicated, but those 2 things that affect your health and well-being, it has to be affecting sort of a significant risk to your health and well-being. So again, local carers organisations, but particularly Local Age UK, is very good at knowing what kind of support is available locally.
Thank you. Emma has asked, what are you hoping to get out of Carers Week this year, and is there anything in particular that you're working towards?
Sure. I mean, first of all, we're working towards raising awareness. So all those people who don't think of themselves as carers, it's really important that they get connected with different elements of support. So we're hoping we'll look at the kinds of awareness that we've raised. So last year, I think our reach through the media was about 128 million.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Which is, there are thousands of events going up and down the country. And those events will reach out to thousands of carers, which we'll ask people about, how many people do you think you helped identify? And so we will have achieved quite a lot through that. We have been asking MPs and parliamentarians in Scotland to make pledges to carers, pledging to speak up in Parliament. So there was a question today in the House of Lords from Baroness Bickley to the Minister, asking what further support would be provided to carers. So we're seeing things being brought up this week in debate, which is important, that carers' voices are heard. And we'd taken carers to Parliament yesterday to speak directly to MPs and to ministers about their experiences.
Amazing. We're getting loads of questions in. I'm going to try and fly through them as quickly as possible. Steve says, I'm a new carer for my mother and I can't seem to get help or advice from anywhere. What can I do? I myself am at breaking point.
Well, the first thing that I would do is to contact someone like Carers UK at advice@carersuk.org, and as you know, which you do great information on your website for carers. That's brilliant. We also have an online forum, and that's monitored by carers, and there's carers are commenting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's there as a support mechanism. I can guarantee there's not a question. There's very rarely a question that anybody has ever asked that someone hasn't had experience of. So you certainly wouldn't be alone in feeling that things are challenging and difficult. So you can ask for assessment of your needs. You can apply for different benefits. It's really critical that you look at support if you're working and juggling work and care. Then look at your employment policies. Also talk to your GP.
Thank you. Tim has asked, what protections are there in UK law for carers at work?
So I talked about a right to request flexible working. I talked about a right to time off for emergencies for dependents. There's also the Equality Act. So that prevents discrimination or harassment if you are caring for someone with a disability. So disability is very broadly defined. So it's it doesn't have to be a younger person, it could be an older person.
Right.
And that's called associative discrimination. It's a nice technical term for you. But they're not allowed to treat you differently. So if they're treating you differently compared with perhaps a parent of a child, a non-disabled child, then that's unlawful. So we have some advice on our website about the Equality Act and how that might work in the workplace. So again, it's worth having a look.
Okay. We've had a question from Suzanne. She says, I'm caring for my husband who was diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease 15 years ago. I'm registered with my GP as a carer and have told my employer. But what about my 2 daughters aged 10 and 13? They don't currently do a lot for their dad, just the occasional help. Should I tick the box on the school form to say that they are a young carer?
You could do. I mean, young carers support projects are also a place where lots of children have parents and siblings with disabilities, and it's a place where they understand what that's like in a family. So you could do that. You could, or if before you tick it, why not find out about the services that are provided locally and what happens? You know, how are the children supported, and is that something that you want for your children? Talk that through with them as well. So
she shouldn't be scared to tick it if she's worried they're not sort of doing enough caring then.
Yes, I mean it's really up to them as well as do they want to be identified as well, and checking out the sorts of support that's available locally. They do lots of fun activities as well as doing the emotional support. So as a family, have a look, make a decision. It can sometimes take a little bit more of an emotional toll on you if you have somebody that you're caring for in the family. So it's worth finding out.
Thank you. Tina has said, are you classed as a carer if you're looking after a child with additional needs? Who offers sound advice on benefits and form filling for a child?
Oh goodness, you absolutely are a carer if your child has additional needs. And this is where parents really sort of kind of go under the radar, if you like. People think that because you're a parent of a disabled child, you're a parent. You are a parent.
Yeah.
But your life is very different if your child has additional needs. And quite often that goes unrecognised. You need time for yourself, you need time for your other children, you need the time for a partner. That's very important. I believe you have a right to all of those things, and you can certainly bring those up in your own assessment as a carer. So we provide some information and advice about your rights as a parent with a child with additional needs. On our website in terms of assessments, and so does Contact. They're very good at that as well. They specialise in parents of disabled children.
Thank you. Zooming through these now, so Paul has said, my mother was refused carer's allowance as she's having a small state pension. She does have an underlying entitlement. What on earth does this mean? This was not explained to us.
No, what on earth does underlying entitlement mean? It's not a normal phrase, is it? What it means is that you're entitled to it, so you fulfil all the conditions, you just are not paid it. So why you aren't paid it is because it's class is the same thing as the state pension.
Right.
So is it valuable or not? And the answer is potentially yes. So if you're on a small pension and you have underlying entitlement, it might mean that you can get a top up to your benefits.
Okay.
So it's worth finding out. And so if you then have means tested benefits, again, it might help you to get other things that are related, like housing benefit. So benefits checks. There are benefits checkers on things like Turn to Us website. There's you can always go to local carers organisation or perhaps Local Age UK to ask about getting a benefits check, and that will tell you whether your mother can get more income.
Thank you. Carers Want Competence, which is a Facebook group. They've got in touch to say, after a complaint process, rather than just withdrawing care, do you think social care organisations have a duty of care to seek alternative providers?
That's very interesting because social care, the local council has a duty of care to people, particularly if they're not self-funders. So they have a duty of care ultimately to people who are assessed as needing care. So if care can't just be withdrawn, and so it depends who the responsibility lies with as to whether care needs to be put in. But I have seen instances where people have been worried about complaining about a service. You should feel you're able to do that. That's part of a good service. If you do come across a service that you are worried about and you're concerned about it but don't feel able to complain, you can actually write into the Care Quality Commission, the regulator, and they'll take on board what you say. and they will take a range of action, anything from when they do their next inspection,
Right.
taking on board what you say, to, in some instances, they will take immediate action.
Okay.
So they won't necessarily deal with your complaint, but they will use that information to look at the quality of services. But when it comes to individuals who have important needs in the community and the council is responsible, you can't just withdraw care and not put in alternative care. They have a duty to provide appropriate care.
Thank you. Right, last two questions. Thank you to everyone who has got in touch today. This is from Jen. She says, are health services doing anything for carers?
Yes, it depends on where you live as to what you get, really. More and more GP practices are identifying carers. So you can look on the forms when you sign up with a practice or ask them.
Okay.
And they might have different clinics sometimes. They might have different services. Sometimes they're more flexible about appointments, which I know is always welcome. Particularly if you can imagine if you're caring for somebody, let's say your husband has dementia. It's hard to bring him along to the surgery. You can't leave him at home. You can't get alternative care, but it's difficult. He finds it very difficult to wait in the waiting room, gets very agitated. So you can see that kind of flexibility, or you know, you have an autistic child with very challenging behaviour, very difficult for them in that scenario.
Yeah.
That kind of flexibility really just makes the world of difference. So find out what's going on in GP practice. Now in hospitals, there's been an increasing amount of activity about recognising carers, particularly around dementia. There's been a campaign called John's Campaign, which was spearheaded after someone with dementia didn't get very good care.
Right. And
families felt ignored out of the process. So now what you should do is ask the ward whether there's a carers support policy in place. What should then happen is, if you have the consent of the patient, or if you're acting in their best interests, if they can't give you consent, then you be identified, included in important conversations. You might have longer visiting hours, so you could perhaps help with different tasks such as feeding and drinking at important times. Some allow you to make your own cups of tea. Some have a carers lounge. In Bedfordshire, they have a carers lounge.
Really?
Yes, where they also provide information advice. The local organisation comes in.
That's good.
Which is brilliant, because when the person leaves hospital, it's the carer who takes on the responsibility again. So to be not always involved in that process, and all the people that have got in touch today where they're caring for somebody with really complex needs and find it hard to communicate, quite often the carer knows what they're saying or trying to say.
Right, of course.
They know what their needs are, and they're invaluable to getting it right.
Yeah.
Somebody with learning disabilities who might be very upset by the situation. Parents, or perhaps a brother or sister, really important people to be able to advise health professionals about how to care best for them in hospital. So, and at the point of hospital discharge, you should be involved. You should get early warning, you should be involved in that process. You should understand what kinds of care are going to happen post-hospital discharge and be knowledgeable and prepared.
Thank you. One more question. This is from Paul. How will GDPR affect carers?
That's really interesting. What an interesting question. I'm hoping that it won't stop good transfers of information between health and care organisations. So it will cause health and care organisations to ask you about how you want to be kept in touch. But one thing that really frustrates people is when you have to tell your story many times to different agencies. Can't I just tell it once?
Yeah.
Why don't you know? So people quite often have an expectation that your information will be shared across health, across the different health agencies, and across the social care. So there's kind of there's an expectation that things will work smoothly.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that GDPR doesn't provide a bit of a hiccup in that process.
Yes. I suppose we won't know until at least a few months down the line.
I think so when things start to better. I know NHS organisations and local councils have been working very hard on trying to integrate information systems so that they can share important information so that people get a better care. fewer mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
I would say fewer work for us all to do in chasing up our different records in different places. So I'm hoping that will bear fruit.
Thank you. Well, thank you to everyone who's got involved. I'm afraid we don't have any more time for questions. I quickly want to touch on our campaign. I mean, if you are interested, we are running a campaign. It's called Care Needs Care Now. It's a petition that you can sign on the Which website. What do you think of our petition?
I think it's absolutely vital, and I think it's a great campaign. If you're in a care home, then you're fighting. We're fighting for consumer rights. We're fighting for more transparency about those really important contracts that you sign and how that operates. And I just want to congratulate you on 135,000 signatures so far.
Yay.
It's really great, and I'd urge anybody listening to this session to sign up and pass the message on. Get others to sign up as well. It could matter for us all, actually.
Yes.
Our relatives, either here and now or for ourselves in the future. So we really need to change that system.
Yeah.
So we're going to need to back you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your support, and thank you for coming on today. I mean, it's been amazing to talk to you. I'm sure everyone that's been watching has gained so much from your knowledge. If you didn't get a chance to get your questions answered, you can go on the Which website, you can go on the Carers UK website. There's loads of information on there. Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
And enjoy the rest of Carers Week.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. We'll be back next week for another episode of Ask the Experts. Have a lovely week.